direction and talk about Jeff's book. Or the sort of subject matter, The British Bloke Decoded, which tries broadly to explain the behaviour of Britain's husbands, dads and brothers. Now, it's quite a light-hearted book.
From banter to man flu, everything finally explained.
There you go. All right, good promotion. Men have obviously and arguably taken a lot of flack, rightly, in the past few years. Many people would say post #MeToo. Is this an attempt to rehabilitate the image of an average bloke?
Well, I suppose what I always thought was like that blokes are a subset species of men, and most blokes don't really have a huge amount of power in their own lives. They're sort of trying to be dependable, loving people for the people in their lives. They might not be the best at remembering important dates or even the names of their nephews and nieces, you know, like. But I think that it's an occasional rubbishness coming from a good place. So what I've tried to do in this book is just try to explain some of the more baffling behaviour of men, like, you know, the fact that we don't put on sun cream when we're on holiday, you know, maybe till the third day. It's easy to say, well, it's just bravado. And then I sort of thought about it more deeply and I thought, well, actually, we don't put on lotions more generally. So the moment we're on a beach and you have to navigate that bit of your lower back...
It's because you're not used to doing it.
We're not match fit, Joe. That's the thing. And you think that might be the first time we've touched that bit of our back that year. So I was trying to take a lot of these areas where men's behaviour is confusing and say, is there something deeper? And I think that they're light-hearted subjects like that, but there's also, you know, like loneliness and what happens to male friendships as we age.
Well, and when it comes to the serious points, we might come back to the application of sun cream later on, but in the Times, this headline, Rishi Sunak urged to appoint Minister for Men, suggested by a Conservative MP. New role would champion issues such as reducing male suicide. Would that be something you'd be in favour of?
Well, what's interesting about that is the hostility it sometimes faces whenever it comes up. I saw a programme where there was like a feminist academic and a Lib Dem MP, and they were so hostile to this idea. And I thought, if you flipped those things, i.e. that it's the biggest cause of death for men under 50 is suicide, men are less likely to go to the doctors, you know, men are less likely to maintain friendships. If that was for women, we'd often look at, well, why is society making that happen? Whereas with men, the argument is often, why are they doing that to themselves? So I'm not, like, totally wedded to the idea, but the hostility towards the idea, I find it instructive.
Ava?
I think that it feeds into the culture a little bit, this Minister for Men argument. Like, in my mind, I think there should be a Minister for Mental Health, which would be all-encompassing. I mean, you've got something like 7 million children waiting for prescriptions for mental health at the moment. It's a crisis that's endemic throughout the country, not specific to men. And I think, you know, a lot of ministers kind of bandy this about to sort of... I'm sorry, but make an enemy out of women, I think. Not you, and I don't think your book is.
I don't
Sunak...
accept that. I don't think it is to make an enemy. If we looked at during COVID, men were literally more likely to die from COVID. And I don't really want to cast myself as a meninist or one of these guys from the manosphere, because that's not who I am. But I do find it interesting that sometimes the arguments tend to throw it back.
But who was doing all the work during COVID? You know, a lot of the time, if you looked into people's households, it was the women who were taking on the laundry, the school care, all of that.
But I'm not disputing any of that. What I'm saying that there are specific issues that men face that might warrant specific attention. I mean, literally, the biggest killer of men under 50 is suicide. That is an arresting statistic, and if that doesn't warrant specific attention, mental health is an umbrella issue.
I have to say that is also because women are unsuccessful. That is a lot of feeds into that statistic.
But it feels like it just doesn't feel like you've got any space for this idea that men might have unique challenges that face them. And the problem is, even as I'm saying this, in my mind, it's like I've got out the violin, and I don't want to be.
Read the book.
I don't want to be this guy, because that's part of the problem. Is because you're encouraged at one level is men need to talk about their problems more, and then the moment you do it, you're like, all right, but not quite so often and not quite so loud. So like you say, the book is more light-hearted than that, but it certainly, you know, goes around these issues.
Francis?
I think it's about this issue. I've got a brother, a son, nephews. Paul Novak, one of my best mates, who's leading the TUC. When you look at masculinity, it sort of feels like boys are still brought up. You're not allowed to cry. You're not allowed to talk about your feelings. You've got to put on this bravado. And I think that has to change. But I also think that we have to change the fact that women still earn 15% less than men.
But no one's saying that you can't do both.
No, exactly.
We can multitask.
Exactly.
Can you multitask?
Well, not me personally, obviously. But I'm saying that. But I don't think that those are reasons to not address these problems,
No, I agree.
Francis.
But most women experience sexual harassment.
I totally accept that. I don't understand why. But it's happening again with this conversation where I'm talking about the specific issues that men face, and you're quoting other issues which I do not contest on any level.
Here's a proposal.
I'm seeming very chippy now, aren't I? I didn't expect
Why don't you launch BASH, Blokes Against Sexual Harassment.
Well, I'm totally against sexual harassment, of course I am.
But do something to support women, stand by women who are facing that in the way that women stand by men. You stand by women, and I think we could.
Well, I do
really
think this
get something
discussion has
going.
already been interesting. I've mentioned the suicide stat several times, and we've ended up discussing other things which are completely valid, certainly in terms of my industry, and I understand why those discussions are live discussions. But the idea that we can't have both those discussions, I genuinely find that odd,
Nobody said we
Francis.
couldn't.
Is this
Well, I
is
tried
this
to,
discussion
and then it was
being
shut down.
squeezed out? Is there not enough space for this as well?
Well, it slightly feels, I'd rather agree with Jeff. I'm fascinated listening to this discussion that at the first hint of men saying maybe, we need a bit of attention, is, women have been oppressed throughout the ages, which is true. But it must be the case that if there are specific male problems or problems that only affect men, then we should try and deal with them at the same time as dealing with the specific issues that affect women.
What would you task the Minister for Men
Sexism
with
is
doing?
ultimately bad for men too. Sexual harassment is ultimately bad for men too. And decent men need to stand up and say so. And I
I'm
think
happy
we
to
could
say so
have
right
better,
now. I'm happy
better
to talk about
lives together.
the problems in my industry. I'm happy to stand and say, that in comedy there are specific problems in and
because there
around
is
this
a power
area.
imbalance.
But
isn't
that's
there?
what,
We can't
and
get
I've
away
had
from
that discussion on my podcast and elsewhere. I'm happy to say that as many times as people want me to say it. But just in this small section of the show, I thought we were going to just mention about some of the specific problems that men face. Men were more likely to die from COVID. If that had been flipped, we would have looked at why is this? This is a tragedy. We'd have looked at all the underlying reasons. But it just wasn't really a discussion. And I'm just interested in why it wasn't a discussion.
Well, that'll be for the next show.
Yes, the book
Thank
is
you.
more light-hearted than this discussion. I just made that point.
That's all we have time for. But thank you to all of my guests, and I will be back tomorrow, of course, with Politics Live at 12:15. Bye-bye.